A lot of the courses, regular courses, have a long session, where it's like the first class or the first week of class. But this one's a little different, and I'm not trying to teach a class right now.
Thank you.
I just want to kind of introduce what the course is and how we're doing it. There are 17 people enrolled at the moment, and quite a few of them are not transformative studies students, or at least they're not here at the retreat, at the intensive. So I don't feel like I should be doing things here that would exclude them. On the other hand, since you're all here and there may be interest in the course among people who haven't signed up or maybe want to sign up in the future, this is just a kind of welcome and introduction. And to those of you, this is being recorded, who watch this later, same message to you. This is a welcome message and just a little bit about the course. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the course, and again, this is informal, and so we'll go from there. This is what I would call a slow course. Like slow food is fashionable right now, and it's a slow course. If you look at the syllabus, it's like a readings course with fairly significant periods of time after each reading. After each, there's a series of books that I recommend, and the way we go is from one to another, but then there are periods of time between them, and some of those are like 3 or 4 weeks, so that's why it's slow. I've set up the readings in pairs so that when you come to each one, there are 2 books that I'm recommending, and I'm suggesting you pick one or the other, or you can fish around with both of them if you like. It looks like a lot of stuff to buy, but that's not my intention. I actually started out giving these books away, and I got in trouble because the librarians were going to lock me up. But I've still, Steve and I have still been devious. We've put most of the books on the web where you can actually see them. And you can actually read them there, but you can't download them. And then we've said for educational use only. So you can go look at these books, and you can sample them, and in some cases, you may get all that you really need or want from them by just going online. I haven't figured out exactly how you did that, but you did a nice job of putting those up. So you can find them, you can see them, and if you really like one of them, you can, or several, you can buy them. We have an official book service now at CIS that CIS is quite committed to. So I've listed all of them there, but there's no law that says you can't go buy them at a used book store somewhere else or get them online at a used book service, depending upon what they cost and what you want to buy. My only caution is if you go to a used book service online, like there's one called Libris.com that I use for everything because I like it. If I order from Amazon new, it'll be at my house in 2 days. I don't know how they do that, but they get the book to me quicker than I can get down to Barnes & Noble's downtown, and it's a small town. But if I buy a used copy, I often wait anywhere from a week to 2 or 3 weeks because they let the seller in northern Florida know that it's been ordered or whatever it is, and then they ship it themselves. Now, this works fine, but you need a much better lead time on it. Or you can get nearly all these books electronically with an iBook or through Amazon. What's the Amazon book service?
Kindle.
Kindle, yeah. So there are a lot of ways to get these books. My intention is that we will have these topics, and I'll talk about these in a minute, and each topic is represented by, I picked 2 books, could have picked a lot more, but they represent the topic, and if you do the reading of one of those books or seriously sample both of them, you'll be involved in the topic. And then the course really goes on in a dialogue online. So those of you who are, all of you in this room, for example, are transformative studies students, so you're familiar with what we call dialogical learning. It's one of our hallmarks for our program, is that you go online and you dialogue and you talk about it with other people. However, a number of you watching this video are not in transformative studies and are not in programs that emphasize dialogical learning, as we call it. So in plain English, what it means is we like to chat about the book and about the topic. And one of the requirements for the course is to come online at the website, at the discussion page, and they're already up there and going, and we're creating them, and to log in at least a couple times, 3 times a week, and post something. This does not mean you need to write an essay. It does not mean you need to write the great American novel. You can just post something. You say, well, I'm reading this article by Oliver Sacks or whatever it is, and I'm finding this particular thing interesting, or I was delighted to find this because it's related to one of my topics of interest, or I never thought about anything like this before, or I hate that man and I don't even want to read anything or hear anything by him again. Just welcome. I mean, can we change things a little bit so we're not getting these lighting problem from because it's picking up the screen? Or we can probably just change. Oh, well, that works too. So I was saying that this is a very informal gathering, and we're recording it because there are quite a few people that are not here that are taking the course, or in other programs, and even 1 or 2. I have a friend at Yale, faculty member at Yale, who's taking this course. So, did you say something?
No, just she's.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, very briefly, as you'll see, it's set up for a series of topics. Each topic has 2 books that I've listed, although they're not the do-all and end-all of all books. And possibly you could pick other books or maybe choose alternatives. But the idea is to pick one of these books and do some serious reading into it, or take both books and sample them, however it works best for you. I'm not asking people to buy all these books. I was just saying this, but I'll repeat it again. I'm not at liberty to give them away. We started giving them away a couple of years ago. We got in trouble with the librarian. But I have cheated a little bit. Steve has put almost all of these books up in a format online that you can look at them.
They're all there.
And are they all there?
Yeah.
Steve's wonderful. So you can't download them, but they're on a page. It's for educational use only. We're very clear about that because that's part of the copyright issue around these.
It's not really an issue with this class because these books are still in print, but another course that he teaches, some of the books are out of print and impossible to find. So.
Well, anyway, you can look at them, and depending upon your patience sitting at the computer, you could read them right on the computer for that matter. But my suggestion is you find the ones you like the most, and you can order copies through the CIS book service. Or if you take a little longer with it, it could be a used book. You can buy an electronic version online or however you like to do it. The way we do it is we will take the topic, like the first one, only one book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, and we'll read through that book and we'll dialogue about it. So where this course, the activity in this course goes on is on the website in the discussion pages. And as I was saying a minute ago, I would like everyone to log on a couple, 3 times a week and post something, and it can be very short, doesn't have to be a big deal. We just want you to be there, and we want to have a sense of your being there and part of creating a community. This always works pretty well with transformative study people because we're all used to this kind of dialogical process of learning, although a number of you are in other programs and your program doesn't work that way. So I want to invite you to, as well, to log into the course site and just say hi. If you've got a few sentences you can say about what you're reading or what you're thinking about, that's really good. But I'm happy to have you just come and say, I'm reading this book, or I saw this movie and it really reminded me of this. Just be there, Did you have a question?
Yeah, is this, if I'm doing the consciousness focus?
Yes.
Is this one of the courses?
Yes. Consciousness focus is a kind of alternative in the program in which you would take this course, you would take my Introduction to Consciousness Studies, which is offered in the spring, you would do a dissertation that has something to do with consciousness. We're not real strict about it, but have that in mind. And that you would select your electives with this interest in mind. It's fairly broad. I mean, that would include even courses like Connie's Krishnamurti course, for example.
So the 2 courses for the focus are not from the 3 electives?
The 2 courses required for the focus are
They
electives.
can be part of the 3 electives, you think?
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely. Alfonso and I have been pushing to get more electives, but right now we don't. So, yeah. So where was I? So we're moving along. It's going to be a slow course. It's going to be fairly long open spaces between the readings, and I want to have dialogue during those times, but it doesn't have to be intense. In fact, I think you may find the course goes fairly slow. And that's fine because I would like you to have the space to explore your own interests. I don't want this to be a hard course. I want this to be a course where you're reading, doing some reading, you're dialoguing with other folks taking the course, maybe asking me questions, maybe thinking about how this might be relevant to your own inquiry as you go along. So the only thing I want to caution you about is to find it too slow and then wander off and then disappear. And that's why I really want to emphasize that please log on and just say hi, 2 or 3 times a week so that, we know you're there and there's a sense of community. So that's the way that works. Well, is that enough for just generally about the course? I can talk about the books a little bit, maybe that would be good. Any other questions?
Are you teaching any classes in the summer?
I taught a course last summer on consciousness in films, archetypes, films, and realities. That was more fun than a barrel of monkeys. We read. Yeah, you took it. We started out with 2 films a week, and that seemed to be a little much. I don't know why, but it was. But so we ended up every 10-day cycle. We had 2 films. So the films range from some old classics in film history, like Ingmar Bergman's The Silence, which incidentally, while the course was going on, won an award in Spain as one of the great films of all time. And Ingmar Bergman is one of the directors. And then some of the other films were like Get Out, really scary film, but Chip McNeil talked me into including it, and I'm so glad he did. There was a rumor it was a horror film, and I don't believe it. I think it's more like a Hitchcock film. Welcome, come on in.
So would that count as part of the consciousness?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I'm hoping to teach that course every summer.
So
It was so much fun, and I like films, obviously.
So the intro to consciousness and this consciousness of the brain, are those 2 required?
Those 2 are required, plus your other courses that, whether they're electives or your dissertation, have some connection with consciousness. But that's pretty open. I mean, I don't police that much. I don't think I've ever denied anyone that possibility. You also can get a certificate that you passed the concentration, but we need to request it fairly early from the registrar. I don't understand how that works. It's not. There's no policing of it. You just have to ask for it. But if you don't ask for it, you don't get it. And once they start to set up the degrees to print, you can't get it on later. So it's not anything that anybody will look for before they give you a job or anything like that. Yeah. So now you've taken away my only set of books.
I have.
Steve, she kind of an assistant I have. Help, Steve, I need a list of the books.
I'm a bad person. Hold on.
At
Thank
what
you.
stage do we request that?
Like a vote.
Thank you. Well, I just,
Because I already printed this.
sometime around when you're filing for a degree.
Oh, just at the, so just
Yeah,
at
it's
the
no
paperwork at
hurry.
the end.
Or is
Yeah,
it not
okay.
on there?
Not earlier than that.
The books are on the calendar.
What
Yeah.
are we doing here? We're talking about the certificate. You need to ask for that roughly about the same time that you're applying for the degree. That's way on down the line. I just only mention it. And thank you for giving them all away. That's the trouble.
Yeah, well, I mean, you wanted me to advertise it. Now
Now
they're standing room only. So.
Okay. So, are there any other questions about the structure and the way the course works?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Leslie. The thought papers. that
Yeah.
you
Oh,
want
thank you. That's a good topic. Yeah, I got myself
Okay.
confused.
Would you talk about that?
Yeah, at the end of, after we've read each of the books or sets of books, and you can see the calendar set up into units, and each one is has one or two books. Most of them have two books from which you select one or the other. At the end of that period, and I think we need to work on the dates a little bit for this and sharpen this up a bit, but the periods are fairly long, and near the end of that period, I want each person to write a thought paper about, bless you, about that topic or those books, what they've been doing or thinking about or reading. And this would be like roughly one page and informal. We're not looking for APA style or anything like that. It just should be thoughtful. I used to say a letter home to Aunt Mabel. I've been reading this book, and I've learned this, that, and the other, but I disagree with this over here, and I think this guy's a bigot. But he's got some nice things to say, or whatever, just informal. It can be more formal. I'm happy with that, but it should reflect the fact that you have been involved in this general topic area, whatever we're doing, and you have some thoughts about it, and those thoughts will reflect the fact that you actually have done some reading and just making it all up in a whole cloth. And that's it. And so there'll be one of these for each of these sections. I would hope you wouldn't have to spend over half an hour writing it. It's not something that we're going to grade.
And do you want them to? So, for example, the first book,
Yeah.
Oliver Sacks, it's until September the 16th. Do you want the thought paper?
Yeah, and
by
sometime,
the
as I
16th?
just said to Steve, we need to work on the dates a little bit. But yeah, sometime like around the 16th.
Yeah. So if we take the end date of the period of the reading, as
You'll
the
be safe.
date,
We may think about doing them a little earlier so we'll have some discussion time. But
Okay.
right now, the end date of that period is the date the thought paper is required. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And at the end of the course, I want a paper from each person, each student, that is in more depth, that reflects your thought or research on some topic related to the course. It could be most anything that we have touched on or is related to the course, so that's pretty open-ended. People always ask me for page numbers, and I never can remember from one time to the next when they ask me, so you always get a different answer. But generally, for master's students, 15 pages. For doctoral students, 20 to 25, something in that range. I remember when I was in graduate school, my professor said, under 40 pages, you haven't been thinking about it. But I'm a slow reader, so I don't really want to read papers that long. So
But you're a fast responder.
I have the gift of chat, as they say. And I like the dialogue sort of format. It works very well for me. So there's a paper at the end. This paper at the end should have some level of approval from myself or from Steve. That doesn't mean anything formal. It just means we would like to have the chance to respond. I should explain why I've always had this policy, because I've been involved for so many years in so many parts of psychology, the study of the brain and consciousness, that I feel at least that I can oftentimes suggest resources that you may not know about. And I can also warn you that this is a great topic. You want to study color and emotion, it's a great topic. There's 2 or 3 libraries in Rome on that topic. You want to go read all the books, but it's just too big to write a 20-page paper on unless you hone it down a little bit. So the other thing I want to be able to do is offer those kinds of suggestions and and also let you know if I think you're likely to run into trouble unless you hone it down. Or I may have a suggestion. Did you ever think about this over here? Like, who was I talking to about who works in the community for? I think he took the course. It works in the community in Florida for people who are
Oh,
mentally.
Joshua.
Yeah, and he's thinking about a dissertation about, well, it could go in any number of directions, but one of them would be spaces and and places people would live that would be ideal for people that have Alzheimer's to some degree or something. And so we're talking over lunch yesterday, and I said, "Well, have you read the NASA studies?" And he said, "NASA studies? I don't know anything about NASA studies." Well, NASA spent a lot of money years ago figuring out what kinds of environments were best if you had to live in a spaceship for 8 or 10 months on the way to Mars, and a lot of these had to do with color. So I actually built a solar house years ago, and I use this for colors for the paints in the house. Some of them are contemplative, some of them are bright, and you've never heard of that. Well, not that he should have, but that's an example of something I happen to know about and I could bring to the table for him. So that's why I like to hear about these things ahead of time. Of course, there always are horror stories, but mostly with undergraduates where you get a paper. I remember once I got a paper on the cement industry in Missouri. Actually, that was the second page. The first page was on classical conditioning in rats or something, and that was the term paper. The second paper was on mining in Missouri, and it had a grade on it. So obviously it's been used for another class that actually graded. Well, that's a little bit of a shock to get one of those. I didn't even expect anything like that from this class and from a graduate class, but it's just funny to think about sort of things. Anyway, I won't run off on that. So, Oliver Sacks, most of you know who he is, a very famous guy, died about a year ago, and with much sadness because he was so widely loved. Probably more YouTube videos of him interviewed on the internet than anybody else I've ever seen, at least in the area of science and the brain and so on. But this first book was written a long time ago. It's a classic, and it's written here. It says Sacks 2012, but I think the book was actually written in the 80s. It was the first book that really looked at different kinds of neurological disorders from the point of view of the patient. The sort of inner point of view was simpatico for the person. Everything prior to that was very objective and treated patients like objects. Excuse me. And is this thing working, by the way?
Yep.
Okay. And excuse me. Sacks was always a wonderful writer, and he writes from this sort of point of view of the person experiencing whatever these disorders are. He writes with compassion. He's a good writer. He's a humanistic writer. So this book really created a genre in a way. It was after this book came out that we began getting all these books by psychiatrists and neurologists and other folks about psychiatric patients and neurological patients and so on. But this book covers a lot of ground in this book, and each one of these cases, case history, is absolutely fascinating. The title case, for example, the man who mistook his wife for a hat, is about a music professor who was acting a little strange around the house, and finally his wife brought him into the neurological center to see Oliver Sacks, and he seemed pretty normal. I don't remember the details, but when he got up to get his hat, he grabbed his wife's head. Clearly mistook his wife for a hat. And it turns out that he had a large tumor that had affected his brain, the visual area of his brain. And he got around and did things with music. He would have a song for cooking, a song for walking, maybe had a song for going to the bathroom, I don't know. But he was able to navigate his life with these songs and these music. So that's the first story. The book is full of really interesting stories, I think, and gives you a sense of how profoundly our lives are altered when the brain's not working right. There's a guy in there who is living 30, 40 years in the past and doesn't know it. Thinks the war is just over. And he's the result of, probably heavy drinking. I'm trying to remember the clinical name. What's that?
Yeah,
PTSD.
No, that's right there.
No, it's not PTSD.
He
It's,
lost his memory, didn't he? A big gap of his life.
Yeah, it's a
Not amnesia.
well, it is amnesia,
Mhm.
but there's a name for this neurological condition in which
If it was drinking, I heard it informally termed wet brain, but I know there's organic brain syndrome or something.
yeah, you all are doing well. But we don't have the right term, and I can't remember right now. But
Like a shell shock?
no, it's a neurological condition. The brain is literally really affected. Certain parts of the brain that form memories. On the tip of my tongue, I'm very bad with tips of tongues. But anyway, it's an example of someone. Or there's a story in there called "On the Level," I think, something like that. This guy was always going over like this. He had a brain. So they got him this thing that was sort of like a windshield wiper on his glasses, and it would always point down, and he could watch that, and he could walk as long as he had this thing on it. Really fascinating stories in this, and they're all different. One of my favorites is the president's speech, and the reason I can tell it was Ronald Reagan given the date, but the room was filled with patients. Some of them couldn't understand the language very well, but they understood the emotional, because of their brain damage. They understood the emotional content, so they knew he was lying. So they picked that up. And the other group could understand the speech, but it didn't really make any sense because Reagan didn't make any sense, and he was just a political speaker. So you got these two groups, and neither one of them, they were laughing and laughing. Neither one of them, it just looked ridiculous to both of them. But to a normal person, it sort of made sense. Anyway.
On the Level, was that the one you were saying with vertigo? Is that vertigo?
Well, vertigo is the symptom.
Symptom of. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the neurological problem was with him. I'm not sure whether we know what it was or not, actually. Korsakoff syndrome.
Okay.
One I couldn't think of a minute ago. Korsakoff syndrome is a loss of memory, and sometimes there's a kind of a manic state people get into, and it's almost like a seizure. So anyway, you get quite a panoply of different kinds of symptoms that come into a neurological clinic in this book, and they're beautifully written. They're all short, and Oliver Sacks has moments of reflection that I really want to emphasize reading at the beginning. Nobody had done this before, I have to say, at least nobody I know of. So really fairly deep reflections on the brain and the mind, on the clinic, and on neurological disorders, and trying to understand and empathize with and, be with these people. So he was famous for that. And so this book is still a classic. I do mention that he uses a British language, referring to retarded people as the simple. In fact, I think that whole section of the book is called The Simple. He meant that in a very positive way. He liked people that were simple. They're honest, they're kind, they're not complicated. But he didn't mean this in a negative way. So British language, especially a few years ago, and maybe still is, it's really, really different. I remember when I was in Cambridge, I was in a coffee shop, and there was a big sign up that said, "Lane toilet in the back." Okay, it took me quite a while to figure that one out, but in Britain, if you have a physical disability, you're lame. Lame is what you are. What? Must be lame. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that language in there. Please don't be put off by it because it doesn't really mean much. Well, all right, let me go on and just mention some of the other ones briefly. And again, these are recommended books, and I want you to get involved in the topic, but it doesn't mean I expect you to read these books cover to cover. I never read books myself cover to cover. I try to get out what I need from them, and you can pick one or both. The second set of books is really difficult for me to choose between them, but we can't do everything. There's so many wonderful books. The Brain That Changes Itself. This is a whole book about profound changes that can go on neurologically after a brain injury. And this was radical, I'll tell you. When this book came out 10 years or so ago, and this information came out that people can really cure themselves or become cured of serious brain dysfunction. When I was an undergraduate, and long after that, it was taken for granted that any damage to the brain is irreparable. The peripheral nervous system can regrow. Nerve cells can regrow, and they do. So if you damage your arm and you kill a nerve fiber there, it can regrow in time. But all the evidence was that when there's damage in the central nervous system, it never regrows. And part of the reason is the scar tissue forms. And the scar tissue blocks regrowth. So that was, in neurology, they have what are called dogmas. One dogma was that there's no recovery from central nervous system tissue damage. And almost all these involve some kind of tissue damage. Well, Dioge, however you pronounce his name, had discovered this really is not true. It turns out that functions can relocate. So you can have whole functions relocate to the other side of the brain or move around somewhere else and reestablish themselves. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort. And typically people give up, he says, just before the improvement would have come because they become so discouraged. And he gives an example. I think it's been a year or two since I read this, but I think it was his own father. It was someone he knew very well. Who had had a stroke or such and couldn't walk, and he was crawling. And so they would crawl around in the backyard. The neighbors thought he was terrible. It was this old man. He's this old man crawling around in the backyard. Everything crawl. Well, after many months of this, the old man got up and started to walk and then began to give lectures at the university where he was a professor and pretty much completely recovered. But the point was, it took a long time, and nobody had really invested that much in it because it was very discouraging. You're not going to get better. You're doing all this and so. So this book is full of examples like that, and it just wowed me when I read it because I, having been educated for many years at a time when recovery of central nervous system function just didn't happen. Or you retrain people to do a little bit. You've seen many of those on TV, retrain people. But we're talking about a guy who can't walk. And now he's up strutting around in front of the room giving lectures. Well, the other book, The Developing Mind. So this is a conflict for me. You might look at both of them. When I was getting these course materials ready, I wanted to get something that involved embodiment a little bit more because it's such a big part of what CIS is in many of our programs, and we have a program in semantic psychology. Yeah, and so I started calling people around the school in somatic psychology and integral health. And did you recommend a book? Can you recommend a book that really will bring this mind-body thing together for students? And they all recommended this one, The Developing Mind, which I had known nothing about. I'm just reading it myself right now. But it's a book on the development of the brain and the development of the mind through childhood. It's very pertinent to education. It's very pertinent to raising children. It's kind of what it was written for. But it goes deeply into how experience modifies the development of the brain and the mind. And the author is actually, I believe, a psychiatrist. So it's a really strangely sort of written book because it's written around psychological themes like memory and emotion and those sorts of things you would find in a psychology book, but then it's all undergirded by how the brain is affected and really puts a big emphasis on how social interactions affect the development of the brain. Well, that's another one that was not supposed to happen when I was educated. The idea that you would be in different social environments and that would have anything to do with the way your brain develops, because we know that all has to do with genetics and maybe diet a little bit. But no, this one is really more about the malleability of growth of the brain, and it's really written for people who are interested in development, child development. It's a really big book. So I leave it to you to decide where to find yourself between these two books, or maybe you would want to, have both of them, one of them. But they're very good, yeah.
Do either one of them have anything interesting to say about epilepsy? Like, for example, in some cultures, you're a shaman. If you have epilepsy, there's a book called The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down. In some cultures, that person is designated as a community shaman. However, in some other cultures, they might be considered simple, or they might be considered crazy or possessed and need an exorcist, for example.
I don't know. I don't remember epilepsy from either of those books, but I would not want to say it's not in there, because it's been a few years since I read The Brain That Changes Itself, and I would have to do a text search of it in, I have all these electronic form, so I can't say.
All right, no, I mean, I'm interested a little bit in altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, if you go online where Steve has listed these books, and you can actually read them there, you can search them.
Right.
You can't download them, but you can actually do a search like you would do a PDF file you can find.
I shared them through my Google Drive, and then I made it so you can't download them, so you can just view them, and there's a little search thing.
Yeah, as I said, we were giving them away for a while, and we got in trouble for it. Don't be giving those books away. So anyway, the topic of epilepsy, I'd love to talk more about that. We could talk more about that. I will only say this, that people have done psychiatric evaluations of shamans, and they're more in touch with reality than the average people. So that's interesting.
Didn't Ian Gilchrist talk a little bit about epilepsy in his studies?
Well, I'm still reading his book too, by the way, so I'm a little
I have
behind.
a memory, because I saw the Master and His Emissary on here too.
That's been a really popular book, and it's really gotten a lot of good credit. And, I sent out, I don't know if you all have seen the little video by him. I have a sort of history in this area. I was very involved in left and right brain research when it first got going. I have co-chaired probably 20 articles on the topic, research articles. And I was pretty well convinced, as he says in that little video that I put on the web, that it's a burned out topic. And while there certainly are differences in left and right sides of the brain, that it really just becomes such a popular topic, it's probably better not to talk about it. And he sort of reinvented the topic in this book. And I have to admit, I'll tell you the truth, I avoided the book for several years, even though it was so popular, because I'm really sick of that. I actually presented a paper once at a conference on how the two, the research was not reliable on the two sides. And then, there's weird stuff in this area, and I know a lot of it is very interesting. For example, if you look at EEG, when people are talking or writing or stuff, you get big differences. But then if you look at no, you don't get differences. But if you look at brain damage, you do get big differences. And then if you use what's called the WADA technique, in which you anesthetize one side or the other, you get big differences. And all, it's like psychology is full of this stuff. You measure it this way, you get one thing. You measure it that way, you get another. So it's an interesting area. But he's really done a good job with it and written a really fascinating book. But I don't know whether he's got epilepsy in there or not. That one comes along.
I remember him talking a little bit about some studies where one of the treatments was to cut
Between the left and right brain.
Well, that's how it
I
all
know there
got
was
started.
some
This was
results
back in the 70s at Caltech. Roger Sperry, Nobel Prize winner, mostly for his work on development, actually, a biologist, had discovered he could split the two sides by cutting the corpus callosum in cats. So you could train a cat to now this was in the era of behaviorism and Skinner boxes, you understand. So he would present a stimulus, and one paw would do one thing, and one paw would do the other. And then they got looking at these people that had intractable epilepsy. Intractable epilepsy is an ugly thing. People get into seizures, you can't turn them off. And as a final desperate effort to block the epilepsy, they transected, cut the corpus callosum, the big bundle of fiber that connects the left and right hemisphere. And he said, well, that'll restrict the epilepsy to one side. So they'll be seizing on one side, but the other side can still be conscious. There actually is some weird stuff like that. If you look at temporal lobe epilepsy, people can report while they're seizing. Dostoevsky had something like this.
That's wonderful.
Yes. But anyway, so where am I with this story? But what happened is the epilepsy went away. And to this day, nobody understands why, if you cut the corpus callosum, the epilepsy goes away. But then you get what's called split brain people. And one side seems to know one thing and the other another, and you can set up interesting situations where you can talk to one side and give it opposite information for the other. It's a whole story we could go on about.
There's people with totally normal EEGs that have epilepsy, but it never shows up on an EEG.
The epilepsy disappears once you
It's
do
like
that.
not there. No, they're
Oh, you mean the temporal lobe epilepsy?
not temporal lobe. There's other kinds of epilepsy. I don't have temporal lobe personally.
Yeah.
I've had personally normal EEGs since the age of 14 when I got epilepsy. As far as my EEGs go, I don't have epilepsy. But then I get,
You get seizures.
I have generalized and localized both.
Well, epilepsy normally, usually is a kind of firestorm across the cortex, in which cells begin to discharge and are random in big ways. And anyway, so that's a whole other story. But the epilepsy disappeared once he did this transaction. So where am I at with this? Anyway, so that led to a whole era of research on the left and right brain. And on what was going on with these split brain people, because actually after a few weeks they seem to be perfectly normal, unless you do something really strange, like there's a way to give a message to the left hemisphere to ask a person to do something, and then they can start to do it, and while you basically ask the right hemisphere to do it, and they start to do it, you can set up images so that one hemisphere or the other only sees it. And then you send a message to the right hemisphere to do something, and they'll start to do it. And then you say, wait a minute, what are you doing? And then the left skull mate will answer, because the left skull mate's got the language, and you'll get a confabulation. They'll tell you they're doing it for some reason. It's nothing to do with the real reason, because they don't know about it. See, things get very strange. These people have just about disappeared now, because it turns out that you don't need to transect the whole corpus callosum. There's two little commissures, they're called, that connect the left and right brain, and you can transect one of those. It's much more minor, and it makes the epilepsy go away, and you don't have a split brain person. But these people, after a few weeks, seem to be perfectly normal. It's very interesting to drive a car and so on. Okay, so where are we at with
Do you
this?
want to take a look at some slides? You only got.
I think I would rather just talk about the books a little more,
Okay.
because the slides are, I can put the slides online.
Okay.
I had a few slides of nerve cells and of the brain just to kind of introduce it. But, and let me say, now that we're doing this, and you bring this up, thank you, Steve. One of the books I picked here, and you can look at online, you don't have to buy it, but it's a wonderful book. This is the one by Carter, Aldridge, Page and Parker, and Frith, called The Human Brain Book. I mean, this is a coffee table book.
I bought it. It's beautiful.
It's
I
beautiful.
got one too. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It is, and
It's so fun.
it's a little bit out of date, but not much. And when you get into the part about olfaction, smell that is, or memory, or visual perception, there's a whole essay about it. So this book has really got a lot about brain function. It's a wonderful book. So I was going to show you a few pictures, but you can look at that book. And you can look at it online without buying it if you just want to do that.
My 16-year-old son quickly grabbed it and took it into his room.
It's not come back. Oh, very bad.
He's just so excited about it. Yeah.
So you tell him
Yeah.
I'll send the librarian around to your house and he'll come and get it.
I was
You ever
surprised.
see the TV series, action series of The Librarian? It's crazy.
The librarians, yeah.
Anyway, so where were we? Well, I want to mention a couple of other books. One of the books I have at the same time, what time is it, by the way? Okay. At the same time in the course as the Gilchrist book. Can I have somebody close the door there? They're going to be working out there for a while. I'm glad they are. But the other book I have at that point is Goldberg. I can't pronounce his first name unless I see it written out. It's a Russian name, but The New Executive Brain. Goldberg has done some wonderful work on the left and right brain and what they mean, and it's a little bit different. He views the left and right brain developmentally, points out that in childhood the right brain is larger. As we get older, the left brain is larger. And he also has done some interesting work in theorizing about aging. He's one of these people that points out that when you get old, you don't necessarily get less functional. Old people can do things incredibly well sometimes because the left brain has developed patterns and algorithms and ways to do things. So they can do things, get stuff done. So the kids are trying to figure it out, but the old left brain already knows how to do it. He's an interesting guy. He studied under Alexander Luria, recognized as one of the greatest neurologists in history, and you'll read Oliver Sacks talking about Luria. He's very proud of the fact that he communicated with Luria. Luria was a Russian, great Russian neurologist, clinical neurologist in the 50s, and he was Jewish, by the way, and they left him alone, even though he was Jewish, because he was so famous. Oliver Sacks corresponded with him some, but Goldberg was one of his students. Worked with him for years, and Goldberg wanted out. I don't know why Luria stayed in Russia. He could have snuck out at any time, but Goldberg wanted out. But he didn't want to humiliate his master, his teacher, because, in Russia at that time, if he'd have left, that would have reflected on Luria, who he respected. So here's what Goldberg did. He moved to the Ukraine, made himself as obscure as possible, started working at night in a morgue where he would haul bodies around, and for I don't know how long, he just lived in total obscurity with his awful job until he sort of had disappeared from the records, and then he applied to go to the U.S., and they said, oh, yeah, get him out of here. He's the kind of guy we'd like to get rid of, and he was able to come to the U.S., start over again. But he's a brilliant guy. It's an interesting story, too, actually, about him. Several students have read his work and been a little offended because, like many neurologists, he's a pretty much thoroughgoing materialist. He's not talking about out-of-the-body experiences or reincarnation. He's talking about the brain. So if you read this book, he's going to view the brain as the final truth about our mental and physical reality. I think you just have to accept that. I mean, we're reading here books by studies by neurologists. They've committed their lives understanding how things work psychologically in terms of consciousness, in terms of the brain, and it's all about the brain. So that's what we're going to learn about here. This last one on the list I have down here, there are two books. How Emotions Are Made, that's a very recent book. And Lisa Barrett is a very fascinating person. You can find interviews with her on YouTube. She's been studying emotions. She's come up with really a whole kind of new way of thinking about the brain that's much more malleable and much less, maybe it's more culturally embedded. Basically, it's saying, start out with emotions, and she's basically saying we've got the idea that, these emotions are all universal. And there's some reason to think that. There's some famous films from back in the 30s where people went around the world, the cultures like in the backwoods of New Zealand. And, you can tell what people are doing. They laugh, they smile, they get these funny faces. They're just the same thing you would see anywhere. But she's also got a lot of evidence that emotion, the expression of emotion, is not universal. That it is, different in different cultures. And well, I don't know what to say about her except she's brilliant. She's every time I hear her talk, she blows my mind. She's full of really incredibly good ideas. And if you don't get a chance to read the book, listen to some of her. I think I even put one of her YouTubes online. She's just very interesting. And any idea you have about how learning takes place, how people communicate with each other, how the brain works, she will disenchant you on it and explain to you that it's not like that, and she'll have some other idea that are very creative. So I recommend this book very highly. The last one, Consciousness and the Social Brain, I really don't like this book, but I feel some obligation as the teacher to give you a well-accepted, scientific, no argument, whatever, view of consciousness of the brain that's written, highly respected by folks who are not weird and don't live in Marin County. So there it is. And certainly his work is excellent. He looks at the brain, looks at consciousness from a social psychological point of view. There's nothing mysterious about it, but it's just plain good work. All right, I think I've covered almost everything here. And so what can I say to clarify, or that you would like to say, or anything? Well, thank you for your patience, and I hope you either take the course and enjoy it, or don't take the course but still enjoy this book, these books, or take the course next year. I offer this every fall. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.